If one of us can be removed from this table by another, then none of us are seated here by right. Let the weight of that statement just sink in for a second. This isn't a line from some Hollywood political thriller, folks. This was actually spoken in a closed room by a world leader during a moment that fundamentally shattered the architecture of modern diplomacy. Welcome to The Explainer. I'm your host, and today we're breaking down a truly unprecedented event, a moment when the rules that have governed the free world for decades simply evaporated. The collapse of consensus. Today, we're going to walk through a gripping, minute-by-minute deconstruction of a summit that went entirely off the rails. We'll examine exactly how 50 years of international trust and institutional stability collapsed in just a few minutes. Because, listen, this isn't just about a minor disagreement over trade policy. Not at all. This is about the very foundation of global consensus and how a single, silent decision completely redefined the balance of power among the world's most powerful nations. Picture this. It's morning. The G7 summit is kicking off with the usual visual language of stability and cooperation. Leaders are arriving one by one at this stunning luxury resort. It's surrounded by tranquil water, but make no mistake, it has a heavily guarded perimeter. This is a place chosen specifically for diplomacy, but absolutely designed for control. Behind closed doors, the agenda was supposed to be totally familiar. Global trade pressure, inflation risks, supply chain issues. The whole morning routine was entirely focused on projecting stability to an increasingly divided world, right up until everything fractured. Now, the sheer speed at which this system broke down, it's honestly staggering. At exactly 8:45 a.m., Prime Minister Mark Carney and the Canadian delegation arrive at the entrance of the main working session room. This was supposed to be completely routine. I mean, Canada is one of the original pillars of the G7, but at 8:46 a.m., there's no negotiation, there's no diplomatic protocol triggered. Carney is halted by a literal wall of U.S. security. 2 American security officials alongside the White House advance team just block the door. By 8:47 a.m., the unilateral exclusion is enforced in real time. No warning, just a closed door. To really grasp the gravity of this moment, we need to understand exactly what kind of action this was. It was a unilateral decision, an action taken by a single party without the agreement, consent, or even consultation of the others involved. Look, in a military alliance or a trade bloc, you might have strict enforcement mechanisms. But the G7? It operates entirely on agreement. Every member is theoretically equal. The whole system survives strictly because no one publicly tests its limits. So, by blocking Canada unilaterally, that foundational boundary wasn't just tested, it was completely bulldozed. So, while Carney and his delegation are standing in this narrow, suddenly very tense corridor outside, let's take a look at what's happening inside the formal meeting room. It is a completely different kind of silence in there. France, Germany, Japan, Italy, and the UK are all seated, preparing for the session. Through the glass, they can physically see Canada locked out. And then the President of the United States enters the room. He takes a seat right at the center of the table, adjusts his posture, and looks around, as if the structure of the summit is perfectly intact. And then he breaks the silence. He delivers a sentence that, quite frankly, would echo across every capital on Earth. Canada is not participating today. He didn't present it as an opening for discussion. It was a firm, steady, and deliberate declaration. He cited economic interests, sure, but the justification didn't matter nearly as much as the line that followed. This is our table, we built it, and we decide who sits at it. Delivering those exact words completely redefined the ownership of a shared global institution. In that one instant, the entire architecture of global alliances was rewritten. Think about it. The original design of the G7 was built on consensus and equality. It was specifically meant to prevent any one nation from owning the table. But the new reality enforced in that room? That was dictated by permission and hierarchy. The American president's words caused an instantaneous tectonic shift. If one member can dictate who sits at the table, well, it's no longer an alliance of equals. It is a system dictated entirely by permission. Now, what followed inside that room is what folks in the diplomatic world call a silent recalibration. No leader interrupted immediately. Every camera remained fixed. But remember, in high-level diplomacy, silence is never neutrality. It is pure calculation. The leaders weren't just listening to the speaker anymore, they were listening to each other's silence. Because they all knew that if this action was accepted without a response, this new hierarchical precedent would be embedded forever. You can actually track this chilling realization rippling through the room just by looking at the subtle shifts in body language. The French president stops participating. He leans back and visibly begins assessing the room's new hierarchy. The German chancellor places her pen down, she stops taking notes, and shifts her attention entirely away from the policy agenda, focusing straight on the power dynamics. Japan's prime minister, who is usually highly procedural, shifts his posture entirely away from the table, folding his hands and halting any active negotiation. They all realize the exact same thing. If Canada isn't safe from unilateral removal, absolutely none of them are. The shift from complete stillness to decisive actions started with the French president. He pushed his chair back, audibly breaking the static rhythm of the room. He didn't even address the US president directly. Instead, he spoke into the space itself, delivering a foundational blow to this newly enforced hierarchy. He said, "If one of us can be removed from this table by another, then none of us are seated here by right. We are seated here by permission, and I did not come to the G7 to sit at anyone's permission." That statement, it wasn't looking for compromise. It pulled the very foundation out from under the meeting. The chain reaction was immediate. France initiates the break, getting up and walking toward the exit. Germany instantly aligns. The chancellor closes her folder and stands. Japan's prime minister offers a small, measured bow, not to any person in the room, mind you, but to the institution itself, before exiting ceremonially. And Italy formally follows right behind. But it was the final departure that really etched this moment into the history books. We're talking about an 80-year fracture. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom remains seated just a bit longer than the others. For decades, the special relationship between the US and the UK had survived world wars, economic crises, and massive global realignments. In that long, heavy silence, you could practically see the profound calculation happening, weighing 80 years of unwavering loyalty against a core institutional principle. And then, he stood up. No explanation. He just walked away. Less than 4 minutes. 4 minutes. That is all it took for 5 of the most powerful world leaders to leave the room. And they didn't leave in protest of a specific policy, but in total rejection of a precedent. Inside the room, the physical space was entirely altered. What remained was this stark physical manifestation of diplomatic separation. Just asymmetrical, empty chairs. A table that was supposed to represent a unified global front had instantly transformed into a record of a broken alliance. Now, the summit didn't actually end, it just moved. The real center of power shifted out to a narrow stretch of glass and marble that was only ever meant as a transition space. Suddenly, this accidental hallway became the real stage of the summit. There were no assigned chairs out there, no microphones, no flags defining who was more important. Just a group of world leaders held together, not by some formal, prearranged agreement, but by a shared, visceral reaction to a crossed boundary. Out there in that corridor, a truly profound convergence takes place. The 5 leaders join Mark Carney, who had been waiting there the entire time. And in that exact moment, the boundary between the participants and the excluded member collapsed completely. Handshakes, brief words, quiet exchanges. It was no longer just about Canada being blocked at the door. It was about what that single action had triggered in the massive, invisible structure holding them all together. A reporter out in the hall actually manages to get to Carney and asks him what's going on. His response is incredibly revealing. He pauses, looks at the group of global leaders standing right beside him, and says, "I am not the story, they are." And then he physically takes a half step back. He literally removed himself from the center of attention to emphasize a massive reality here. The true crisis wasn't his personal exclusion from a meeting. The true crisis was the total, real-time breakdown of the institution itself. Meanwhile, back inside that fractured meeting room, the US president eventually stands up. But how he leaves is just as telling as the walkout itself. He adjusts his jacket and chooses to exit through a completely separate passage with his security detail. Listen, in the highly choreographed world of diplomacy, an exit is never just neutral. It's a directional signal. Choosing an alternative path, intentionally avoiding the corridor where the other leaders had gathered, was a physical manifestation of 2 completely different global trajectories moving forward. The formal, traditional structure of the G7, it had effectively flatlined. It was replaced by something forming, one silent decision at a time, just outside the room. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, critical question to chew on today. When a shared global system, one built over decades on consensus and equality, suddenly fractures into permission and hierarchy, what takes its place? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the structures around you.